was at school, there was an old nun, and every year in September we'd say, "Dame, tell us the story of Kylemore." And she'd always start off by telling about how the Mitchell Henrys were in Connemara on their honeymoon, and they stayed at what was then the hunting lodge, because he was great at fishing and hunting and all that. When he came into the legacy, he said, "What shall we do with it?" And she said, "Oh, Mitchell, do you know that hunting lodge at Kylemore? Buy me that and build me a castle." And so that's just what he did.
The story of Kylemore really spans about 140 years, from the time of Mitchell Henry first took possession of this land, which was in 1862. And during the course of the history of the abbey, it's had, well, it was a castle first and then an abbey. It's had 4 owners. First we had Mitchell Henry, who purchased the property and built the original castle, and that was from 1862 up until 1903. And then we had the Manchesters came in after us. They were from 1903 to 1914. And then we had Ernest Folk. He was the man who took over the mortgage of the Manchesters from 1914 to 1920, and the Benedictine nuns have been in possession of the building since 1920, and they converted it from a castle to an abbey. When Mitchell Henry first took possession of the land, as I say, it was originally a very small quantity. He began to buy up the land on either side of the River Davros to obtain the fishing rights, and he eventually ended up owning 15,000 acres. And along with the 15,000 acres came 125 tenants. So he suddenly found himself as being a landlord. But he took his responsibilities very seriously, and he became a very good landlord. And he began developing the estate very meticulously and scientifically, and everything was done in great detail, and records were kept. The house would have a tremendous impact on the area and on the people. It is a focal point from the time of its construction, both for employment and as a tourist attraction. Even in the very early days it was a tourist attraction. You find wonderful descriptions of people coming out here to view the gardens when they were under construction, and the glass houses, of course. The 21 glass houses in Connemara in the 1870s was such a rare thing that it drew all sorts of attention and publicity from far and abroad.
Shortly after Mitchell Henry completed Kylemore, his wife died. He never remarried, and for the next 30 years he lived at Kylemore with his 9 children. He had spent his entire fortune on Kylemore. In 1903, the Duke of Manchester became the new owner.
When he was made Duke, he was very young, and his estate was overseen by trustees. And by the time he came of age, he had already run up huge debts. So pretty soon afterwards, just about 2 months before he married, he was declared bankrupt. And then, of course, he conveniently married this wonderful and very good-looking heiress from America. She was the only daughter of a Cincinnati millionaire, and her name was Helena Zimmerman.
The Manchesters owned Kylemore for 11 years. It was then taken over by the mortgagees Ernest Folk, who eventually sold Kylemore Castle to the Benedictine nuns.
The nuns came here in 1920. They first of all had to leave, of course, the monastery in Ypres during the First World War, and then they came to England for a little while. They were at Oulton Abbey, and then they came to Wexford, to Macmine Castle, and they spent some time there. But the place was rather small for them, you know, with the school and all that, and the community beginning to establish itself and grow, and so therefore they needed a bigger place. And Kylemore was for sale, and the Archbishop at the time was good enough and gracious enough to support the community, and that's why and how we acquired the castle here at Kylemore, which is now, of course, our abbey.
When the nuns arrived here in 1920, they would have found a very, very lonely house that needed a little bit of love and a lot of attention, and it eventually received that from the nuns, and now, of course, it receives an awful lot of love from its tourists and from the many people that come to visit here as well, because it's a very magical spot. It's a really wonderful place to visit, and people love coming here time and time again in all seasons.
If people could be with us a little more, to join with us in prayer, in our divine office, our plain chant, which is a great tradition we've had, and I think it is our great responsibility to carry this tradition forward for quite a few more generations. We feel that we are simply the stewards of Kylemore, that we are keeping this place for future generations, so that more and more people will grow to love Kylemore